The next phase of the microgrid planning process is preliminary site identification. The primary purpose of this phase of the microgrid development planning process is to refine and expand the list of critical facilities that were identified during project initiation, primarily by Mayor's Office staff and the project champion, by obtaining additional input from the internal stakeholders. The goal is to make sure that all the facilities on the initial lists are still valid, and equally important, to make sure that no critical facilities have been overlooked. It should be noted that in most microgrid development projects, the various facilities and other infrastructure that are connected to the microgrid are collectively referred to as sites, indicating that they are either buildings or other infrastructure that connect to the microgrid, or locations where power is generated and supplied to the microgrid, or in many instances both. The preliminary site identification phase includes 3 key steps: convene internal stakeholders and collect input, update and expand the preliminary facilities list, also called the sites list, and develop a master spreadsheet version 1.0. Let's take a look at each of these steps in a bit more detail. Phase 2 starts with the project champion organizing a meeting with the previously identified internal stakeholders. It is recommended that as many of the internal stakeholders as possible review the Microgrids Academy before the meeting. This will allow the team to spend less time introducing concepts and start off with higher level discussions. The goals of the meeting are to discuss and obtain input on the preliminary list of facilities identified during project initiation, and to generate enthusiasm and get commitment from the internal stakeholders to stay on with the process of creating a microgrid development plan. The meeting should begin by providing the preliminary critical facility list and map that was created earlier to the internal stakeholders for review and discussion. The key is to get as much informed input on the facilities list as possible in order to develop a more thorough list of facilities going forward. Shown in the slide is the updated list of critical facilities identified by Neptune Township for its microgrid development plan. As can be seen, the original list has expanded from 17 to 23, with the addition of 6 facilities and infrastructure sites identified by Neptune's internal stakeholder group. It's interesting to note that the original list did not include any public infrastructure, like the water company or the wastewater treatment facility, which were identified by Public Works personnel during the internal stakeholder meetings. This is a good example of how stakeholder input from a broad range of internal stakeholders can help ensure that all relevant facilities and sites are being considered during the microgrid planning process. The final step in the preliminary site identification phase is to create version 1.0 of the master spreadsheet for the project. The master spreadsheet is a document that serves as a repository of technical data gathered throughout the microgrid planning process. Creation of the spreadsheet starts by listing all of the critical facilities that the planning team has decided to include based on in-house discussions and input from the internal stakeholder group. The planning team should try to estimate how critical each facility is to the municipality, as this will help classify the facilities later on in the process. Points of contact for each facility should also be gathered and added to the spreadsheet. A facilities manager or maintenance supervisor is often a good contact to include, since they will have technical knowledge about a facility that will be helpful in subsequent phases of the planning process. The master spreadsheet shown here is a summary version for Neptune Township and includes all 23 of the sites identified during project initiation, together with subsequent input from the internal stakeholder group. This version only shows columns for the key inputs that will be developed over the course of the microgrid planning process: the risk category, the area, and the annual energy usage, all of which will be explained later in this discussion. Additional columns for information such as location, contact information, etc. would be included on the full master spreadsheet, but have been removed here to allow us to focus on the key elements used later in the site screening and final selection processes.